On July 13, 2024, former President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania during a campaign rally. Trump was injured in his right ear, and the attacker, Thomas Matthew Crooks, was shot and killed by the Secret Service's counter-sniper team. After the incident, President Joe Biden said that such violence in America is unheard of. This is not exactly true. Since the United States was founded, 4 presidents were shot and killed, and there were 8 assassination attempts. To understand the historical context of political violence in the United States, let's go over each assassination attempt on American presidents. The first assassination attempt on an American president was in 1835. Just outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., a mentally unstable man named Richard Lawrence approached President Andrew Jackson. Lawrence pulled out a pistol and fired at Jackson. The gun misfired. He then pulled out a second pistol and fired again. This gun also didn't work. Both guns were later tested, and they were actually in working condition. After Lawrence tried to shoot him, President Jackson severely beat Lawrence with his cane. Lawrence was mentally ill and suffered from delusions. He believed that he was Richard III, the deposed King of England, and that killing Jackson would somehow restore his lost wealth and power. After his arrest, Lawrence was found not guilty because of insanity, and he was committed to a mental institution for the rest of his life. Abraham Lincoln was the first US president to be assassinated. In 1865, just days after the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and a Confederate sympathizer. On the evening of April 14, Lincoln went to see a play called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Booth knew the theater very well and planned his attack carefully. He waited until a funny moment in the play happened. While the audience was laughing, he sneaked into the president's box. Booth shot Lincoln in the back of the head with a small pistol. After shooting Lincoln, Booth jumped onto the stage and managed to escape. Many people in the audience thought he was part of the play. Lincoln died the next morning on April 15, 1865. Vice President Andrew Johnson assumed the presidency after the assassination. Booth was eventually found hiding in a barn in Virginia, and he was killed by Union soldiers. In 1881, President James A. Garfield was assassinated by Charles Guiteau. Guiteau believed that he deserved a government position for his supporting Garfield's campaign, and he became angry when his demand to be the American ambassador to France was ignored. On July 2, 1881, he followed Garfield to a railroad station in Washington, D.C., and shot him twice. The president initially survived the attack, but because of the bad hygiene conditions at the hospital, he caught an infection. Doctors kept trying to treat the president's wound with unwashed hands and unsterilized instruments, and this made his infections worse. Because of the poor medical treatment, Garfield died on September 19, 1881. Guiteau was arrested immediately, and the next year he was executed for the crime. On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley was attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. While McKinley was greeting the public and shaking people's hands, Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist, approached him. He was hiding a revolver under a handkerchief. As McKinley extended his hand, Czolgosz fired 2 shots at close range, hitting the president in the abdomen. McKinley died 8 days later, on September 14, 1901. After President McKinley's assassination, security measures for the president were increased. The Secret Service was tasked with protecting the president 24/7. In 1912, former President Theodore Roosevelt was running for a 3rd term. On October 14, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, he was shot by John Schrank, a schizophrenic man who saw hallucinations telling him to kill Roosevelt. Schrank's bullet hit Roosevelt in the chest, but it was slowed by a metal glasses case and the thick 50-page text of his speech in his jacket pocket. Despite his injury, Roosevelt insisted on delivering his 90-minute speech. He famously started with, "Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that. I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Roosevelt was making a reference to his nickname and the mascot of his Progressive Party, which was also known as the Bull Moose Party. He survived the assassination attempt and continued his campaign, but he couldn't win the election. In 1933, President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt on February 15th in Miami, Florida. An Italian immigrant named Giuseppe Zangara fired several shots at him. Although FDR was not hit, Chicago's mayor, who was standing nearby, was wounded and later died from his injuries. Zangara was quickly arrested, tried, and executed for his crime. Zangara's motive to kill the president was caused by his hatred of capitalists. He was angry about the government's inability to address the struggles faced by ordinary people during the Great Depression. In 1950, two Puerto Rican nationalists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresella, tried to assassinate President Harry Truman. They stormed into Blair House, where Truman was staying while the White House was being renovated. Collazo and Torresola, both advocating for Puerto Rican independence, opened fire on the police and the Secret Service protecting Truman. Torresola and a police officer were killed in the gunfight. Truman himself was unharmed because he was in a different part of the house. The Kennedy assassination is perhaps the most famous one on this list. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. He was riding in a motorcade when shots were fired from the Texas Schoolbook Depository building. Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine, was arrested and accused of the crime. Kennedy was pronounced dead at the Parkland Memorial Hospital shortly after the shooting. Oswald was killed 2 days later by the nightclub owner Jack Ruby before he could stand trial. Oswald's death led to numerous conspiracy theories and ongoing debates about the assassination. In 1975, President Gerald Ford faced two assassination attempts within a span of 17 days. The first attempt was on September 5th, when Lynette Fromm, a member of the Manson family, tried to shoot him in Sacramento, California. She was quickly subdued without firing a shot. She was a supporter of Charles Manson and his apocalyptic vision, so she wanted to draw attention to Manson's cause and promote his radical beliefs. The second attempt was on September 22nd in San Francisco, when Sarah Jane Moore fired a gun at Ford, but missed. Sarah Jane Moore was politically motivated. She wanted to protest the Vietnam War and spark a revolution in the US. On March 30, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot in Washington, D.C. by John Hinckley Jr. Hinckley was obsessed with the actress Jodie Foster after watching the 1976 movie Taxi Driver, and he believed that shooting Reagan would impress her. As Reagan was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel, Hinckley shot Reagan in the chest and injured several others, including Press Secretary James Brady. The quick response of Reagan's security team and medical professionals saved his life. Hinckley was later found not guilty by the reason of insanity. In 1994, a man named Francisco Martin Duran fired a semi-automatic rifle at the White House from a distance. He shot 24 rounds, but no one was injured because the president was not in the building at the time. The Secret Service quickly arrested Duran, and he was later convicted for the attack. In 2005, during a visit by President George Bush to Tbilisi, the capital city of Georgia, a man threw a grenade towards Bush while he was giving a speech. The grenade failed to detonate and no one was injured. The attacker was later arrested and sentenced to life in prison. These were all the major assassination attempts on US presidents. There are also many plots that were not included in this video. In addition to the events I listed, there were assassination attempts on vice presidents or presidential candidates as well. For example, Vice President Thomas R. Marshall survived an attack in 1915. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was shot and killed in 1968, and in 1972, George Wallace, also a candidate for president, survived the shooting. For the scope of this video, many such cases weren't included. Thanks for watching. If you want me to cover any topics about history, geography, or politics, please leave your comments below. I will see you guys in the next video.